Genocide or Jesus? Who is the God that we follow? Today, I'm sitting down with Pastor Eric. Thank you for being here.
Yeah.
We had a pretty hefty sermon on Sunday. 45 minutes.
Yes.
I was about 25 minutes into it listening, and I was like, oh, cool, we're wrapping up. And nope, there was a whole another 20 minutes and some more, apparently.
Yes.
So let's just dive right in so that this video isn't 45 minutes. What didn't we get to on Sunday?
My gosh. There's a really great book called Cross Vision by Greg Boyd. And one of the things that he talks about is when we see passages about God's judgment, usually in the form of some sort of violence, almost every example of it in the Bible, there's this idea of God is going to do this thing, and then somebody else does it. And this is a really important concept to understand how God's judgment works. He's not bloodthirsty or the instigator of violence. So one example is in the Exodus 12. I think it's verse 12. You have God saying, I am going to, kill every firstborn and a firstborn animal and child in all of Egypt. And then in verse 23, it says, I will walk amongst you and I will keep the destroyer from killing your firstborn. And you go, whoa, that's different. The first passage says God's going to do it. And then in 23, this destroyer is going to do it. And that's interesting. And then you get, in Cross Vision, he goes through a whole bunch of examples of this very thing happening with God's going to bring violent judgment on the people, and then somebody else does it. Like a foreign ruler actually carries it out.
Right.
And so this paints a really important picture of what God's judgment actually looks like. It doesn't look like he's bloodthirsty and kills. It looks like he removes his hand of protection. And this is important because he doesn't do this, willy-nilly. He doesn't do this lightly. In the case of Pharaoh, he gives him time after time to change his mind. All these different things, the different plagues, consequences for his hardening of his heart. He every single one of those times he could say, you know what, you're right, Lord, I surrender. I'm going to let the people go. And finally, God says, okay, if you want hell on earth, I'll let you have it. And removes his hand of protection. And this destroyer, whatever that is, that's a deep dive into itself.
Right.
This destroyer is something that's always looking to kill, right? And that sounds like a description of what we get in the New Testament of Satan, this one who wants to seek, kill, and destroy. And so God is holding that thing back, and then his judgment is ultimately to say, okay, if that's what you want death, order, and chaos, which is like a way of saying uncreation, right? Well, then I'll let you have it. Yeah. And you see that like a parallel to this in the New Testament where 1 Corinthians chapter 5, Paul is talking about a dude who's up to some really not so pleasant business in the church and is not repentant. And so Paul says, okay, you've sought to restore this person. They're not looking to correct their behavior. Hand them over to Satan so that they can be disciplined and maybe turn around before judgment day. Meaning, if this is what they really want, they want death, chaos, destruction. Let them have it. And hopefully they will see the error of their ways because of what happens, and they will turn around. And so even when God is handing someone over to Satan, there's still the hope that they will repent, change their mind, and have reconciliation with God. And so I think that shows a very different characteristic than what is often portrayed and what people will often say, well, your God's a monster. He killed all these people. Well, actually, in the biblical text, it almost always shows somebody else doing the act of violence, and God has removed his hand of protection. Yeah. Especially when you read through the prophets, that language is there all the time. Removing my hand, holding back these forces of evil, and you are choosing these forces of evil. So fine, if that's what you want, you can have it, and it's going to go really badly for you. Yeah. So that was one of those things that's a sermon in and of itself. I mean, it could be a sermon series in and of itself, because Greg Boyd wrote a whole book kind of about it. So that was one major area that we didn't get to. There was a lot more theology stuff that we could have gotten into about how the early church dealt with these things. And so I had a section on that was... I find it compelling because I think church history is really important, and I think the closer we get back to the teaching of the apostles, I think the best interpretation of Scripture tends to come from there. But I kind of cut some of it because I just think, like, would that be compelling to our audience in contrast to some of the other stuff I shared? And so one of the things that I thought was really fascinating about the early church and their doing theology on this was just how confused they were. Yeah. That they didn't have a bunch more special insight into what to do with the Old Testament, especially those kind of barbaric passages. So I talked a little bit about how some people were just like, just don't even read it. It's not helpful. It's, it doesn't point, it's not a helpful resource. Whereas others, like I said, saw it as like an allegory about this is a story that mirrors the spiritual battle that we have against sin. And I'm like, that's true. I think there's something to that. But I dove into the progressive revelation thing because I think God took a people out of this chaotic world and sought to move them from chaos to order and like I shared on Sunday, that's ultimately revealed in Jesus. That's the best way to be human. So he pulled them out of this dehumanizing world ultimately to reveal us what the truest way of being human is, and that's in Jesus. So, it's fun to talk church fathers. I don't know how much people care about that, but I'm into it. I think what's fascinating, though, is the work that you see happening, around 400 AD, as the Roman Empire is embracing Christianity and eventually making it the state-sponsored religion. And then you get all of these people converting, not because they're convicted about the gospel, but because it's like, well, I got to be in the right group, and this is the right group, right? And then all of a sudden you start to see these philosophers that are far more Roman than they are biblical. And, the thing I like to say is the Holy Roman Empire was very Roman and not so holy. And you start to see the, philosophical groundwork being laid by people like St. Augustine, who's got some great things to say and some things that actually have been really harmful in the long run. I think that's a fascinating thing that, as the Roman influence comes in, this deep conviction of nonviolence is done away with pretty quickly. It's pretty scary, and I think this is a lesson for us all today. And I don't want to be too obvious and just look down the barrel of the camera when I say this, but it is pretty scary how quickly we can give up on deeply held values when there's access to power. I mean, I see the way that the Christian faith, I'm not trying to do hot takes today, but I'm a little fired up right now. I see the way that the Christian faith is used almost like a mascot by politicians, even some entertainers. All right, let me give you my hot take of the day. Can I do this? Can I do this? This is a total sidetrack, but I think it's important an example. You can cut this or not, whatever you want to do. I'm not trying to start a fight, but I think it's gonna be hard to argue it. There is a performer at this week's halftime show. He's Puerto Rican, and that's in America, so he's an American. and he primarily performs in Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people are upset about that.
Mm-hmm.
And some of his content, not family friendly.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe we should be grateful that it's in Spanish, because maybe our kids who don't speak Spanish won't understand. But no, but a lot of people became upset about that because it's supposed to be an American thing, and how are we going to have somebody perform in Spanish? And then other people were upset because, some of his lyrics are a little distasteful.
Mm-hmm.
And then a group is putting together an alternative halftime show. And the performer there is very patriotic. He wears clothes with flags on them, and like his most popular song has America in the title. And I was just like curious. So I did a Google search for what are the lyrics of this his most popular song. Mm-hmm. And it's filthy. Some of the language in there is just indefensible. Mm-hmm. And yet this is supposed to be the Christian alternative to the Super Bowl halftime show. But I think we can be committed to worldly movements, and we're really quick to give up on deeply held convictions if it means we win. And that is the way in which the American church can be very Roman and sometimes not so holy. And so, that's my hot take for the day. But that's kind of where I'll leave that section of things that kind of made it on the cutting room floor. That was not a story I was going to share in Sunday ever. It's actually something I just was honestly just lamenting about yesterday. So that's just a fresh thought. But the idea of how quickly, not those early committed Christians, but those ones who wanted to have Jesus but wanted to have the shiny thing too, how quickly they were willing to say, like, okay, Jesus, but you don't get to have a say in this. And that still feels very relevant to our time and place.
Well, thank you for diving a little more into some of the things that didn't make it into this Sunday's message. I think we'll have to cut here and do a part 2 of this Midweek Mashup. So we'll divide this into 2 videos because I have a lot of questions that I want to get into, but I want to make sure that we got through some of that stuff of things that we wanted to talk about or maybe just recently we're thinking of. But hey, continue on to part 2 when that comes out.